Joining me now is Florida Democratic Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Do miracles actually happen on Capitol Hill, Congresswoman? Have they happened before? Can they get it done? And if so, can the House even reconvene to vote on it in a timely manner?
Well, Yasmin, I generally look at miracles as being a positive thing. And because with Republicans and immigration proposals and immigration policy, the cruelty is the point. It really depends on what comes out of the Senate through these negotiations for me to give you an analysis. I've seen a lot of disturbing proposals that they've been potentially discussing. And if they're talking about, deportation roundups and reestablishing, taking away rights of immigrants who are, claiming asylum and not allowing those kinds of hearings that are, lawful under U.S. law, then that's not something that we should be pairing with vital, foreign emergency supplemental assistance to prevent Putin from running over Ukraine and continuing through Eastern Europe and being strengthened to continue his malign activity by empowering people like Maduro in Venezuela and the Castro regime in Cuba. That's happening.
So then how do you ensure that Ukraine and Israel gets the aid that they need, considering the fact that Republicans are hell-bent on attaching it to immigration reform, talking about some of the proposals that you just spoke about? And let's bring that up on our screens once again. As you mentioned, a national expulsion and visa suspension authority, elimination of nearly all immigration parole authority, mandatory incarceration of all people, families seeking asylum, mass nationwide expansion of expedited removal, numerical caps on asylum and mandates on asylum refusal. How do you get it done? How do you get the aid where it needs to go when Republicans are holding it up with these immigration proposals?
Well, to say nothing of the fact that Speaker Johnson has said that he doesn't even plan, no matter what they agree on, to bring the House back into session to consider if they send us a supposed miracle compromise. The hopes and dreams of Republicans here are that they're going to get this massive immigration policy through that is very controversial, that they would never normally get in exchange for vital emergency supplemental funding that ensures that we make sure that Israel can eradicate Hamas and the threat that Hamas presents to them, and also make sure they can go and rescue the rest of the hostages, or make sure that Hamas releases them. That should be the priority. And Republicans used to actually only focus on, so-called illegal immigration. Now it seems that they just want to block all immigrants from coming to the country regardless. And that's not something that I'd like to see paired. But that doesn't mean that there aren't policies and the funding that President Biden proposed initially in his emergency supplemental bill that he sent to the Congress. Perhaps there's something that we can agree upon. What I'm hearing, and I certainly trust my Democrat colleagues who are negotiating this, right. What I'm hearing is very troubling.
I want to talk about Israel while I have you, right? We have these 3 hostages that were mistakenly killed by the IDF. You have President Biden now, Sec State, Jake Sullivan, who was just in Israel this week as well, essentially compelling the Israeli government, Bibi Netanyahu as well, to tone it down, to kind of move on to the next phase of this war, more targeted strikes, to continue to go after Hamas, but more targeted strikes because of this high civilian death toll. Where are you on this? And how, in fact, do you think the U.S. government can compel Netanyahu to, quote unquote, tone it down, as the president asked?
Yeah, Jake Sullivan was very clear that he did not do that. He was not specific in going to Israel to sit with the war cabinet and dictate to them, when each phase of the war, which was always expected to be conducted in phases, needed to be executed. The bottom line is that all of this could be resolved if Hamas releases the hostages and ends their quest to eradicate Israel and kill Jews. I mean, that's in their charter. It's what they're hell-bent on doing, and it's what they've said repeatedly that they will continue to do. That they, October 7th, there'd be a second, a third, and a thousandth time. So giving Israel and any sovereign nation the ability to conduct a war, to rescue their own people, and to eradicate the security threat is essential. We have a very close relationship. We sit side by side with Israel every single day through intelligence and military cooperation, and we're communicating with them regularly.
So we've heard from the president, though, that they want Israel to move on to this next phase. They want them to be more calculated and more targeted. We heard about them using these dumb bombs. They're not as targeted, hence one of the reasons why we're seeing high civilian death casualties, right? And it seems as if Gazans, Palestinians are now cornered in the south with nowhere really to go. So with the president saying this, Congresswoman, do you feel as if they don't need to tone this down? They cannot move to this more targeted strike, not to give up on going after Hamas and eradicating Hamas from the region, but not doing so by losing thousands and thousands of more Palestinians?
What the president and Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, has communicated is that they want Israel to make sure that they are doing everything they can to limit civilian casualties. But let's not forget that Hamas uses their own civilians as human shields. They embed themselves underneath civilian facilities like hospitals and UN headquarters and and apartment buildings. And so they are putting their own civilians in harm's way, and have publicly said that their civilians are the casualties of war. They don't think of death in the same way that most of the rest of the world does. What the president has been communicating is, please make sure that you do everything you can, and Israel does. More than any other country on earth, when they are engaged in war that they did not start themselves, that is a response to 1,200 of their citizens being slaughtered and 240 taken hostage. What they do in a dense urban environment like this is they notify aggressively for people to get out of harm's way, but Hamas leaves their people in harm's way. And so I know that President Biden and Jake Sullivan publicly said, Jake, when he returned from Israel, that they are confident that Israel is doing what they can to limit those civilian casualties. What Hamas needs to do is that they need to end their threat to eliminate Israel, end their threat to continually attack them, and release the hostages. And all of this would be over. It is on Hamas to end this.
Do you think if all the hostages were released, this would be over?
I certainly think that if the hostages were released and Hamas ended their threat to Israel and to continually attack Israel, yes, Israel has said that. And because that is clear that Hamas is not going to do that, then Israel needs to continue to conduct a war as any sovereign nation who is under threat with a terrorist organization on their doorstep, repeatedly threatening to attack their people. They raped, murdered, savagely, brutally slaughtered 1,200 of their Israeli civilians, and they threatened to do it again. So yes, Israel, who is a peaceful nation, if the threat is eradicated and the hostages are released, which they should be, then Israel would not continue to engage in war. It's not Israel that started this. It is Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, hell-bent on ending Israel as a nation and killing Jews across the country. We just saw Hamas terrorists arrested in Europe for plotting to kill Jews outside of Israel. Hamas is a terrorist organization hell-bent on killing Jews across the world. As a member of the Jewish faith and the Jewish community, yes, I want to make sure that the Hamas and any peace-loving people should want Hamas terrorists to be, their ability to threaten and kill people should be eradicated.
Do you believe, Congresswoman, and this is my last question, and then I'll let you go, do you believe in a two-state solution? Do you believe Palestinians and Israelis can live side by side? And if so, do you think the current Israeli government can get on board with that?
I firmly support a two-state solution with two states for two peoples, Palestinians and Israelis living side by side in peace. with the security ensured for the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. That's why a terrorist organization can't continue to function and exist, and that be able to happen. We need a peace partner, though. Israel needs a partner for peace, a legitimate partner for peace, which, Yasmin, if you've seen over the years, the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian leadership have sadly repeatedly refused to take yes for an answer, and have rejected comprehensive, legitimate, full proposals for a two-state solution. And there's never a good enough deal because, essentially, for so many years, they've not supported the idea that Israel should be able to exist as a Jewish and democratic state. I have questioned in many trips to Israel, Palestinian leaders, and asked them, will you tell us, our congressional delegations, that you believe that Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state? And I've never had a Palestinian leader be able to say that expressly to me or to my colleagues. So it's a two-way street.
Do you believe Netanyahu's government supports a two-state solution?
I mean, Prime Minister Netanyahu has not been willing to this coalition government doesn't seem to have indicated that they are supportive of that. But that is the policy of the United States. It's the most recent policy for the final status negotiations, and that is a policy that should be implemented with a legitimate partner for peace that actually has the authority and the ability and the willingness to move forward with Israeli leadership to establish two states for two peoples. That doesn't appear to be clear that it exists on the Palestinian side right now. But I'm hopeful that when the war is over and the terrorist threat is eradicated and the hostages are home, that we as a United States government can help our ally Israel and our friends among the Palestinian people to bring them back together. We've always been able to play that role as a catalyst in those discussions, and I'm confident that President Biden is the president that can help lead that effort.
Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, I know that you're dealing with a lot of weather right now in your state of Florida as well. So we wish you the best, and I thank you for taking a little bit of time to talk to me this afternoon amidst all of that. Thank you.